So many of you. This is so exciting. Great. Definitely not nervous. Very keen to talk to you all. Before we begin, I'm going to avoid that microphone for feedback. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of our land, the Wurundjeri tribe. Hang on a minute. I'm sorry, I'm getting used to the clicker. The Wurundjeri tribe of the Kulin Nation. Sovereignty was never ceded. Just wait a second for these mates to come in. All right. So on to more positive things. Welcome to Level Up Your Leadership, empowering teams in pre-production. I'm going to have to figure out where I stand, but ultimately I'm very excited to talk about this today. Even just before this talk, having some chats with a few of you about how sucky pre-production can be and what a weird time it is for everyone. So a bit about me. There is a lot of content to get through, so I'm going to whiz through the intro. I'm Sorcha. This is really high up. Pronounced Sorcha, spelt Sorcha. America, Erica with an S, whatever. It's okay if you forget it. I get it all the time. I've been in games for a bit more than 8 years now. A community manager back in the day. I did social media and support, and then I led player support teams. And now I'm a producer. The joys of organisation. And in particular, in the last 2 years, I've been in 4 projects in pre-production. So I guess you can say that this talk is quite close to my heart in the sense that I hate uncertainty, and I like certainty and not having feedback. I'm going to stand over here. So for me, it's all about learning the structures and the things that we can put in place to give ourselves a sense of certainty in times of chaos, which can feel a bit like this. Sometimes you're that person, the producer, the lead, coming into the room. You thought everything was fine, but actually this is not fine. So this whole talk is about sense-making that chaos, finding a bit of rhythm in a space that is otherwise quite disordered. Welcome, everyone. So many people. Sweet. All right. So in the context of this, you missed the best bit. Some of you don't even know who I am. That's all right. In the context of pre-production, I love to refer to the Cynefin framework, and I'm going to come back to this later, so don't stress if you don't remember it. There's a lot of ways we can make decisions across a project, and 4 of the key spaces that you can consider are in this lovely diagram. So to give you a bit of context, the first one is good practices. So when things are good practices, we're talking about production, alpha. There's some things that you don't know, but there's still some things that you're learning. That's okay. Clear is where we're in the space of best practice. So this is probably, say, a game in live ops. You know exactly how long you've got to make the update. There's 4 weeks until content lock, whatever. And then there's chaos, or chaotic, if you will. That's the guy with the pizza. That's your publisher has just said, instead of 5 months, you've now got 3 months to make a game. I don't know if you can actually make a game in that time, but that's basically what that space is. And finally, we have complex, or complexity. Complexity is where we kind of tend to want to be in pre-production, and it can change. But the benefit of this is that we're not in good practice or clear. Because the more we can learn and continue discovering new things and trying new things and dealing with emerging practices, the less we're constraining ourselves to doing the same thing that we've always done. So how can you give your teams, or yourself maybe, the space to do that? Oh, yeah, and the middle's confused. You don't know what any of those stages are. I always miss that one. Anyway, so it's about finding direction in a space of uncertainty, or enabling constraints for your team. So just enough structure and process that people know what to do within the boundaries that they already have available. And what does that look like in pre-prod? Well, that's why you're all here, hopefully. A few key principles: knowing your constraints. What's the game that you're making? Is it a FPS game? Is it a farming game? Whatever. How long have you got? That's a good one too. Providing structured creativity. I've definitely coined this term, and I'm going to say it 5 times, so hopefully you get used to it. And defining a definition of ready. So not done, but knowing when you're ready to iterate. Fourthly, yes, being clear on responsibilities and roles. And finally, embracing play. I love this one, and I hope you all remember it throughout this talk, because I think it's so easy to get caught in the trap of starting a project and committing to the very first idea that you find and going, cool, ship it, it's great. But we don't get to do that often. This is the time to have fun, explore, and do cool stuff. So what do we do? How do we do it? Before we talk about that, I just want to say, I'm assuming you know or don't know, either way, we're not going to be covering building team rapport in this talk, fostering good communication, I love this clicker, creating a team culture, because that's stuff you should inherently be doing at the start of the project anyway, and I've tried to gear this to be quite intermediate. All right, so what are we going to cover? Sections. Number 1, production process. Laying the groundwork, the structures, what does that look like? People, how can you talk to people? What does that look like? Dealing with people. If you see that, take a picture of the slide. If you don't get time, that's okay. There's going to be a bunch of resources later. And finally, we will have a hypothetical game. I swear this is not a game I've worked on. I would be breaking NDAs. I stole this on the internet. This hypothetical game that we're using in this talk will be referred to a lot. Let's pretend it's a multiplayer first-person shooter. You've got 8 months to release it, and you have a publisher, and they want you to do a switch port after release, and it's going to be on console. So just keeping that in mind, because we'll be referring to examples throughout the talk. It sounds like a producer's worst nightmare, just saying. So now that we know our constraints, we know what our game is, how can we go on our sweet, sweet way from pre-production to production and be happy about certainty? A few key things you would assume that you know at that point. All of your risks are low enough that you're happy with them. You're not sitting there going, how does multiplayer work 1 month before release? Terrible idea, don't try it. Everyone can confidently imagine the game. So you, your team, your dog, your stakeholders, your client, and that stuff is relatively feasible. So the scope, the time that you have available, sure, maybe there's some things that are a bit like, I don't know. But for the most part, you're confident enough that you're happy to keep making the game and you're confident in it. That's the key. It's a bit like this. This is the design squiggle. It's not from games. It's from design thinking. And it talks about the concept that at the beginning of something or a project, you're looking at, oh my God, how does it work? And you're discovering all these things and it's chaotic. But as time moves on, you can gain more certainty. Whoa, it's great. And it's a little bit like the Cynefin framework, which we just talked about. Funny that. As you move from the right, this is the wrong way around, you deal with more unknowns and your unknowns become unknown, but they become more known as you learn more things. Great. So that's where we want to go as we move throughout a project. Cool. Lots of content. All right, let's go. Step 1. Section 1, production process. Are we ready to learn some stuff? Yeah. Hell yeah, love it. All right. Energy, cool. All right, processes, the tools. So firstly, creating a definition of ready. Not done. This is defining what you need to know when you're ready to iterate. Setting clear goals across sprints and milestones, and also providing that structured creativity, that key thing that we all know and love. You will love it, I swear. What can we do what do we keep in mind, really, if we don't do these things and we go into production? Bad stuff will happen. What's that bad stuff? Quality of work drops because we're making the wrong game. We don't know what we're clear on. We don't know what our expectations are, the quality of what we're trying to do. I don't know, no one knows. We're all disagreeing with each other. That sucks. And then you might end up pivoting direction later because you're not clear on exactly what it is that you're making, and maybe it isn't a multiplayer game. Maybe it was meant to be The Sims all along. Team empowerment's lowered because everyone's sad. We've just changed all of our work and now we've got to change direction. Cool. So we don't want those things, right? That's not very fun. What can we do to solve it? Step 1 is definition of ready. Woo! I love production. It's all about defining done. So how can you define done when you don't yet know what done is? I know, wacky. How you can do backlog management in this phase where you don't yet have a backlog, perhaps, to work from. And answering the right questions, asking the right questions, and solving them. So firstly, that thing that I just mentioned, definition of done and ready. Done is usually the thing that we like to talk about because done is how do we know when something is considered done. So you get to the end of a task and someone's like, cool, it's done. And then you outline what done counts as. With ready, it's usually in the context of talking about what you need to be ready to do to iterate to get to done. Cool, just a bit of a recap. So this is really hard when we don't know what we're making. Sure, it might depend on the context. So instead, in pre-production, let's consider how we can focus more on building out that backlog, and getting ready to iterate. What is the next thing we need to solve to move forward? So we want to focus here. We don't yet know what that feature is for sure. Maybe we have a broad idea. We might iterate and try some things, but we're not always going to know when it's done, or perhaps we do, but at this stage it's still very early. So we're essentially operating here a little bit more than we would maybe like to. So what are some ways that you can do that with your team that feels like there's a bit of guidance and certainty and things are happening? It's all about driving implementation with questions. So that sounds like a lot of jargon. Basically, what are some things you can ask your team and yourselves to help direct the right work and the tasks that you're creating? So consider, what are your key unknowns? It's a multiplayer game. Geez, okay. How many players can we fit within the space? Are they blue? Are they green? Are they goblins? Okay, whatever. Those are the things you want to start asking. What's the most important thing to solve first? Okay, so we've got like 20 questions we've now come up with. What is the very first thing that is going to really stop me worrying about this game if I look at it? And what do we need to do to answer to move forward? So if none of that makes sense, what's the first thing that you want to explore next? Okay, we think it might be 50 players, we're not sure. Why don't we try testing with 4 players in the game and seeing what that does with prototyping code? Does everything blow up? Who knows? We'll find out. And finally, this is a fun one. Put yourself in yourselves' shoes, a couple of weeks before your release or your content lock, and almost do a post-mortem on that. Imagine how you would feel if you didn't solve the thing. What would be bothering you 2 weeks before your content lock that you really hope you figured out? So what does this look like? Let's take our hypothetical game, and I'm going to get some hypothetical water. What are some ways we can structure our backlog in a way that makes sense for the team and in a space where we're not exactly sure what done looks like? Let's start with an epic. Here is an example of an epic for this hypothetical game. We've figured out that multiplayer is a really big risk. Great. So we're going to take the epic and form some really broad goals around that. So we're not getting into the detail of exactly what it is to solve and how multiplayer works, because we don't know that yet. So hypothetically, we're framing this around the key risks, so you can see, we've got some technical requirements that we want to solve, and we think that if we can come up with some concepts, then broadly that will inform the start of a technical design document. Broad enough that we can drive exploration for the team. Cool. So we take that and we break it down some more. Going back to our questions, what are the key things that we need to solve to move forward in development on multiplayer? The first one that I mentioned that's still here, how many players can I see around me? It's an FPS game. That's probably a big thing to keep in mind. I don't know if anyone's a programmer here, but networking code, lots of people, servers, it gets complicated very quickly. Maybe because it's in space, we want to talk about physics, I don't know, stuff like that. So we begin to ask those questions and break them down and focus on essentially what the first things are that we need to solve. Then we take the biggest one that we're very worried about and we form some outcomes on that. So I'm using acceptance criteria here as an example. It's not technically acceptance criteria, which is like, this is done when the things have been done. It's very broad, but you can see that we're framing this risk in a way where we can start approaching and solving it. So for example, as I said, we've got numbers. We don't know exactly how many players will work, but we're taking the low and the high range, and we're exploring that a bit more. And then you can get granular on, I don't know, the designer throws some cylinders in and see how it looks, or the programmer tests the thing. I don't know all these disciplines in great detail, so these are my examples. And that's where you can get into the specifics. And finally, how does that look in practice? So we've got our broad goals, we break them down, we're essentially chunking the work. Cool, sounds pretty normal, Sorcha. But what's different about this is that, again, we're approaching it on broad things we need to solve, and we're filling out a backlog in a space where we don't know what we're making, so we can just pull in the next most important thing to solve and work on. And of course, you can edit that, it doesn't need to stay like it is. And then hopefully you recover from Games Week fatigue. Hope you guys are noticing my jokes. So why do we do this? It's the cone of uncertainty, great term. I'm just going to throw lots of resources at you, so take a photo if you like. Just briefly though, it's about the concept of, as you have a big chunk of work, like our goals and our epics, what you can estimate is a little bit unclear, but as you can break it down and move through development, you gain more certainty on what it is that you're making. Like the design squiggle, whoa. So, number 2, setting clear goals. We just talked about how to set goals on a sprint-to-sprint, task-to-task basis, basically. How can you give clarity on a day-to-day basis for your team and what it is that they're making? How can we do that more broadly across the big picture for the outcomes or the milestones that you have and what it is that you're setting up? Basically creating decision points for your team so you can stop and make sure that you're actually evaluating progress as it happens. You're not just going from phase to phase and suddenly it's production and you've committed to everything you just talked about. Ooh. So the first step is, well, this isn't a step, this is some context. So normally in a game development project, we have some phases like this. Typical, they may change, whatever, it's an example. And we are focused on here. So how can we break that down and set some outcomes on phases within this space of time to kind of drive things to bigger picture problem solving? So, pre-production. You might normally have some phases like this. You go from pitch to concept to planning, prototype, first playable, vertical slice. You might call them something else, that's not the point. The goal is that as we move through each phase, we learn more things about the game that we're making. So by the time we get to the end of vertical slice, we're clear on all of those risks and we can confidently move forward. Now, what we can do with these phases, and I'll show you in a moment, words. I feel like I'm telling you about game dev here, which I am, but broadly speaking, as you get from pitch to concept, you know what it is that you're making. You should know at this point broadly what the game is, why the vision will be clear. And as you move into planning and prototype, of course, that's where your opportunity to test and iterate and demonstrate those ideas is your best chance. And finally, by the time you get to vertical slice, of course, those risks are pretty clear at that point. Maybe you're showing your art style or your intended quality for the game, enough that you can move forward. Great, sounds all pretty good, Sorcha, but what does that mean for pre-production? Whew. That's everything I just said. If you want to take a photo and it's new to you, go for it or not. Catch up later. There's a photo button. All right, so I could have got some elevator music. So as you can see, as you move through each phase, things become more known. So how can we focus our goals more clearly at each phase to solve those problems? Let's just say hypothetically, our game is greenlit from the pitch. Woo, lots of money from the publisher. Great, thank you very much. And we've realized that multiplayer sucks. And we know that networking code's the biggest thing that we want to solve first. How can we de-risk everything and basically solve that? That's what we call a gates checklist. You might use other tools. One thing I have found helpful, very broadly speaking, it takes a bit of a concept from project management of like checking things off when you're done, throws that out the way, and basically says, what is each milestone that we have, and what is the outcome we want to achieve by the end of it? So let's take our multiplayer game again, for example. Stupid 8-month timeline. So by the end of vertical slice, we want to have fully functional prototype code. Not prototype, sorry, for final quality. Wow, even worse. So in the first playable, we can work back from that and go, cool. Very broadly speaking, I know that as a team, or we work with the team, and this is bottom up, by the way, so your whole team should be in at this point making these suggestions. You can set the broad goal that we know vertical slice, we want to have this done, and then we work back from there. So by the end of the first playable, if that needs to be final in vertical slice, maybe we should have a prototype in our first playable. And then we can look to, say, the concept phase and go, cool, do we want to just have like a high-level understanding of how multiplayer works and what the game is and how players look and stuff like that? So we're taking our outcomes, and then we can very broadly define the scope of work. So we've said that by vertical slice it needs to be completed. Therefore, everything before that may be a prototype or it may be first pass, and the quality will change. So we've looked at our big risks. We've set some outcomes, and we've broken it down so that on the way to solving what we need to solve, we have decision points that we can check in and look at and go, cool, can we confidently move forward? Thirdly, providing structured creativity. So fun. This is all about, can you integrate Agile? Is it possible to do in pre-production? And what does that actually look like? It is, I promise. Having outcome-focused iteration, so knowing what it is that you need to do to move forward, and providing that place to explore, problem solve, think about stuff, and not just make stuff. The first bit of context for this one is Parkinson's law, which I think some people like to call rubber band theory. Either is fine. And basically, this is the concept that work that you have to do will shrink or expand depending on the time that you have available. Seems fun. Less time, less work? No, hopefully. I'm not saying we go and advocate for crunch, but at all. What this does say, though, is that we need to think about how we can provide the team some structure to work within so that we have clear goals to iterate on and get to the end of something with an outcome. So we take this concept and we take it a step further. How can we give more structure to that time that we have available? How can we give the team time to do stuff, but also to think about stuff? Because if we don't do enough thinking, we're going to get to the end of pre-production and realize that perhaps we're actually not solving the right problems. And it's so easy, and I know I do it too, but it's so easy to get into a game project and just like focus on this, like let's just make tasks and I don't know, let's do stuff and and implement the code and try this and that, and not really stop enough to think about making the right things. So how can we do that? This is the concept of red work versus blue work by David Marquette. On the left, we have red work, which is, as I said, it's more about doing. So you're implementing some code, you're iterating, coming up with a new, well, not a new idea, you're actually making stuff happen. Blue work is that literally like blue sky thinking, planning, creativity, time to explore, have new ideas, do all of that fun stuff, have that coffee and end up talking for an hour about the thing that you come up with in the shower. That's the time for that. Maybe not in the shower though. With other people, that would be weird. So, sprints, agile, can you do that with red work and blue work? Yes, you can. Whoa, it's super exciting. I think it's great. Red work and blue work in the context of agile is about understanding how you can use agile to make that structure to iterate on. So you might have your sprint retros and planning, whatever. Really, that's just a foundation of stuff to do. It's tools you can use and take and leave what you don't want. So how can we give ourselves that space to iterate? In the context of pre-production, I'm going to show you all of this, so it's all right, it's getting there. How can we apply red work and blue work in an agile way? So let's take our normal agile ceremonies and change them up a bit for pre-production. What does that look like? Sprint planning, your first opportunity to really get into exploration, ideating. Instead of just going, cool, we've got, I don't know, whatever, 2 weeks, let's estimate some tasks and write them in the backlog. That's fun. I think it's fun. But let's take it a step further. This is the first opportunity to really look at what are the right things to build. Have those discussions, talk about it, plan, think about whether you're building the right things. And then your daily stand-ups, this is yellow, I tried to make it a bit more accessible, but it's actually red work. Typically, this is your opportunity to go, cool, what are we actually doing today? Is it working? What can I do next? And focus on the implementation or the outcomes. Not just a status update, by the way. I know that's really easy to happen with stand-ups, but making it about, cool, I've got a question, or I'm doing my GCAP talk today, and I don't have a microphone and a lapel. I need some help, please unblock me, rather than, I'm doing my GCAP today. Cool. So, a bit more involved. And sprint reviews, probably your next golden opportunity to really work in a bit more thinking time. Rather than looking back and going, what are the things we did this week? Are we building the right things? You've planned them, checking in. Are we building the right things? I'm not saying you go and reinvent the game, but you should be able to look back at your GDD or your vision and go, cool, does this make sense for what we've learned so far? Have that discussion, play test, and use those insights into things that you're exploring to inform the next iteration or sprint. Not just looking at a burn down chart and asking ourselves why it didn't burn down. Does happen. Retros, finally, how can we build the right things? Pretty clear. I think a retro is still a wonderful opportunity to just check in across the board and talk about what works and what doesn't, but really stop and use that as an opportunity to talk about what you can keep doing well. So let's just say you're in first playable, you've got a bunch of levels, you've worked out that they all take like 5 weeks to make. Can we keep building levels and make a tool with a button that just makes a level? Wouldn't that be nice? I wish. So all of that stuff I just said, if you want it in more detail, you can take a picture. And then we will move on to the next section and I'll have some water. Oh, lots of cameras, cute. All right, wrapping up. That's a lot of words. Some key takeaways from this section. Thinking about how you can set gates at each major part of development. So not just milestones, but broadly, we have all of these problems, when can we solve them? And what does the outcome of that look like? We've informed some insights on this, or we've got an art direction document, or we've solved multiplayer. Using Agile as a framework to iterate. You don't have to use Agile, but again, look at the tools that you have available to you that you learn about as a producer or a lead, and treat them as tools, not just as things that you have to stick to exactly all the time. And use that as an opportunity to structure your processes to provide more thinking and planning time and not just doing time. And focus as much as you can on an opportunity to learn. It's pre-production, embrace it, like have fun. Do the dumb prototype, draw a picture with programmer art, do what you need to do to explore and make it fun for ourselves, because I think it's so easy to lose that in development. All right, section 2, people. This is all about, it's about people, I swear, but also change management and managing that change as it occurs and how you can do that. What does that look like and how can you support your team through this kind of chaotic phase? A really cool Agile coach once said that functioning and performing teams have 2 simple traits. I'm also running out of time, so I'm going to speed run this section. Sorry, everyone. That is that they have team processes that work and people that talk with each other. That's from Takeshi Yoshida, and I think it nicely sums up this talk in that we have the structures in place to support everyone, and now how do we keep them talking to each other? All right, the tools. Reviewing roles and responsibilities, not just setting them and ignoring them for 5 months, managing change, and being clear on how you can drive decision making. So how much autonomy do you give as a lead versus like letting people do their own thing? First up, we have roles and responsibilities. When it goes, there we go, cool. This is about setting expectations and deciding who decides. So how can you be clear on who's doing what, who's owning implementation, and who's doing the handover, who's making the work, whatever. That's what we're figuring out. And finally, giving that sense of ownership to the team so that they can come to you with problems. Has anyone ever had a time where you don't know what you're doing on a project? That's this. We want to avoid the point where we get to everyone being Spider-Man, and Spider-Man didn't know how to do the merge request, and now the game is live and there's an asset missing. Does happen, I don't know. But if everyone's Spider-Man, and Spider-Man doesn't know what they're doing, then nothing is going to work. So I'm going to briefly touch on a RACI matrix. It's very easy to go and learn about later. It's very self-explanatory. For the time we have available, it's basically a good way to categorize responsibilities, who's accountable for what, which is A, who's consulted on work, and who should be informed by the outcome. You don't have to document it like that, but everyone on your team should have some level of that, even if it's across like everyone on art. Broadly speaking, enough clarity on what the role is. So how can we take that a step further? Everyone's clear on what they're doing. And essentially map those processes and ways of working so we can identify any gaps. Making sure it's clear who owns what, but also when. So not just implementation and doing, but when does that happen? Where are the gaps? And this is all about evolving our ways of working over time, because this isn't going to change the moment you start a project, you write down everyone's job description, it's like, cool, good job, Bob, you're an engineer. It's going to change. The first way to do that is a pipeline map, this is a game, by the way, this isn't a pipeline map, don't try and try this. I just like speaking to visuals. So pipeline mapping, it's all about taking a discipline or a way of working or a specific thing in your process of game dev and mapping it out from start to finish so you can see where the gaps are, where the handover needs to happen, what communication, any little errors that might happen on the way. Here's an example. So let's take, actually let me start, that's too soon, sorry. Multiplayer game. Let's pretend it's 3D, right? So it's 3D, and your team keeps coming to you with all of these great ideas for characters. Thank you, team, I don't know what to do with these. Sure. So you decide to go, cool, let's think about the process. How is this all happening? Is it smooth? You map it out, and going to really whiz through this. So you've got an idea, concepts generated, models made. This is not a good slide, don't take a photo. You make the model, you review it, it gets implemented with the rig, cool, that's great. But then after some time, you realize that this is quite inefficient, and it's a little bit like waterfall, if you will. It takes a while. So you sit down with the team and then you realize that over time, there's a lot of problems. We can't prove if things work until they're in the game and they're final. That's a bit late. Maybe the final quality animation needs to be done to test if the rig is good. And all of the characters are different shapes, so we need a lot of different rigs. Okay, that's too late to tell. And finally, everyone needs to approve before it gets to the next stage. Whew, a lot of stuff. So you've sat down with the team, everyone had clear roles, you've realized there's some problems, and now you try again. This time you get a lot of character ideas. Great. You can take a photo of this one, it's okay. And instead of just jumping into making a character, we sit down with design and we make a brief, so we're clear on the requirements. Then we can go and make the asset. But we've also identified that we need a bit of sign-off to be clear that something is ready to go, and that that's owned by the art lead. And then, of course, the asset moves through, we make it, and maybe we've identified that we have like a cool test rig that we can just immediately apply the animation to and everything's fine. Cool. Then we can call it done. So you can see that we've taken the problem and taken it a step further. We're clear on the roles and what we need to do to improve the handover or the information flow between each department. So not only have we set clear expectations, but we know who's doing what, at what point, and we can identify how to make those gaps more efficient. Those are some things that I just said on paper. Feel free to take a photo. There's a second one there that refers to communication pipelines. I didn't touch on that. Happy to talk more about it. It's not covered in here, but it's just like some more ways you can focus on it from a communication point of view. All right, we got 8 minutes. Let's go. Finally, a framework for decision making. This is probably my favorite one. It's all about how you can lead versus direct. When do you get buy-in or provide more guidance? How can you enable autonomy on your team to really own their work and come to you with those issues? And still remain that leader or producer or whoever who has enough oversight to kind of say yes or no and support the team in deciding that process. Back to our good friend David Marquette. He has a great quote that says, as a leader, when you try to take control and essentially be a dictator and say, let's do these things, everyone go this way, you attract followers, you attract respect, sure. However, if we can get the slide animation to work, there we go, give control, we create leaders. So we give the opportunity for the team to step up and own their work themselves and decide what is best in the context of the project, because they're the ones on the ground doing that work. How do we do this? Oh, thank you, cool. It's a bit slow.
Feels your fear with the 8 minutes.
Yeah, it does. Oh, damn, I killed it. Okay, everyone. Let's try to whiz through. Okay, I'm going to try it anyway. If you would like to and you feel safe to do so, there's a small audience interaction piece. You may close your eyes. I won't make any sudden noises, I promise. And I would like you to imagine a stressed leader. It's totally ruined it now. That's all right. And think of some words that come to mind. Okay, now open your eyes. Funny that, wow, surprise. Okay, great. So a little bit, anyone want to volunteer some words that come to mind?
Frazzled.
Frazzled, great.
Overloaded.
Overloaded?
Erratic.
Erratic, I like that. Sorry, what did you say? Contradictory, yeah.
Frantic.
Very good. So erratic, contradictory, frazzled, frantic, overloaded. That's a really good description of Pepe. So, again, we're going to move on to another quick example. Everyone close your eyes if you feel safe to do so. You don't have to. Now, imagine a relaxed leader. Now, think of some words that come to mind and open your eyes. I love this image. I really want the pants. What are some words that come to mind to anyone who'd like to share?
Focused.
Focused, yeah. Yeah, what else? Supported. Nice. Mindful, very good. Present. Yeah. All right, so we can see the contrast here. I'm not saying that a stressed person is a bad person, but when we get frazzled and overloaded, we lose our ability to be present and mindful. We lose our ability to be there for our team and provide the right level of guidance. So it's all about balance. Not balance between being stressed and relaxed, but balance between the different styles of leadership available. 5 minutes, let's go. So, Cynefin framework. Again, we want to remain in the top left. So how can we do that in the context of our projects? It's about decision making on the situation that you have available and not trying to be a particular type of person or leader. Maybe that is it, works for some people. So if we're in chaos, we want to provide a little bit more direction because we just need to do anything to get out of disorder and provide some certainty. If we're in complexity, I'm not going to cover stakeholders, sorry. We're in a moderate amount of input. So how can we enable creativity on the project? Think about giving space to come up with emergent ideas and exploring new ways of working. Complicated, a little bit less input. You should be able to go, hey team, I have this problem. How might we solve it? Getting buy-in from other people is good, but ultimately less input is needed. And finally, clear. Just make yourself redundant at this point. No, you should still have a job. AI will probably have it if you don't. But really, at this point, everything should be working smoothly. You know what is happening on the project, so it's just about documenting and defining best practice and allowing the team to run things themselves. Not saying like you're not there, but you can just step in when needed and they can come to you for that. So it's a balance of not being firm but fair. Sorry, got distracted by the time. Yeah, so stepping in when you need to, but allowing the team the space to take control as needed. So I'm not going to do these. It's fun. We would have been great to do it. Let's just say your timeline changes from 5 months to 3. You would be in a space of chaos. Another example. Your game is in live ops. The reviews have gone downhill. Okay. That's a space of complicated because you know what it is you're making. There's now a new unknown. So a couple of quick examples of that in context. And finally, to wrap it up, let's go real fast. Styles adapt situationally. Try not to change yourself. Work with the problem you have. Provide a balance between guidance and also support in the right problems. And being clear on expectations and ownership of work really helps. And pipeline mapping can help with that. Also, RACI matrices, there's a million other ways. And finally, to wrap it up, I'm just going to skip through these. If you fail, talk to your team. Figure out if it's the right game that you're making and ask why. Does it make sense? Great. Okay, key takeaways. Provide teams with structure to explore and be creative and solve the right problems. Think about them too. Focus on iteration and solving risks so that you can lead confidently. Drive sprint and milestone goals around outcomes and not just tasks. Use process mapping to do that if you want to help with outcomes and responsibilities. Adapt your leadership style as needed. This will be available. I'm just going to skip to this. Go ham here. The first one, we've still got 10 minutes.
I was trying to show you 10.
Oh.
You've actually got more time than you thought.
I thought we had to, okay.
We just have a lot of questions.
Cool. Well, lots of time for questions. Sweet. So on the far left, slides and resources. I've linked all of the concepts in there. You can read over the slides again at the end if you like, because I went through them very fast. Twitter, I refuse to call it X. And LinkedIn, none of us use it, but it's there. At the end at 3 p.m, I will automatically have a Twitter post going up where I'd like to collect any questions that you have, not the people that have asked them, because that's weird. And I'll just sort of write a little summary of some of the answers so we can keep the conversation going if you'd like. Final kudos to this man, my dad, who helps me with some of the graphics and pull all the stock images together. Thank you, Dad. He's a good photographer, so you go and hire him. Yeah, cool, thanks. So we have time for questions?
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, you didn't learn about what to do if you fail pre-production, but that's all right. I can ask about that. Any questions from anyone? Yes?
What sort of tools are you using to manage, I guess, your project management aspect of pre-production?
Sorry, what was the question?
What sort of tools are you using for your project management and pre-production?
What were the tools that we're using to project manage and pre-production? Very good question. Whew, I mean, every company I've worked at, it's changed. I work at PlaySide, by the way. I should have said that at the beginning. Anyway, that's where I'm at now. So I've used Handsoft. I've used Jira for tasks and Handsoft for tasks and planning work and breaking it down into epics and things like that. Excel is great for more complicated asset sheets or schedules. Confluence is great for documentation, and honestly, the whole Google suite will cover most of that as well. It depends on the exact tool you're looking for as well. I think when it comes to roadmaps as well, I like to use Miro for a really high-level visual, not the schedule, but just to go like, oh, these are the phases. It's great for a producer because you can mock it up quickly. And also, of course, your sprints live in your task tracking tools along with your schedule as well. Does that answer your question, or is there more specific? Cool. Anyone else? I'm assuming you just learned so much, you've got no questions. Hello, yes.
What's been like the biggest thing that you've overcome with pre-production? Like, you've done other types of producing in different stages of like a game and like the pipeline. So what's the key difference that you find in pre-production that you kind of had to overcome moving into that space?
So the question was, what's the key difference that you've had to overcome in pre-production compared to production? I kind of refer to it a lot throughout this talk, but it's just generally what is the game that we're making? And it sounds so obvious, but it's really not. I think it's really easy to go from the pitch or the idea, whatever you've got, and to know it's broadly this thing, it's this genre, but then when you get into the mechanics of how that actually works, what feels good for a player, whether you've got the right audience, how long is it going to take us to build the thing, oh no, we need a level design tool and it's like 1 week before, whatever, like that kind of stuff is the thing that is challenging about pre-production. Because if you ultimately want your game to ship on time, theoretically, you should be trying to solve as much of that as you can in pre-production. So you go into production just making this stuff, in theory. Doesn't always happen. Yes. Yes.
Just on the concept of vertical slice.
Yes.
I found that if you're making Dishonored, where it's very level based, you can make a level and have it all working from A to Z, and that can sort of prove okay. We just need to make 10 more of these, and we'll be okay.
Yeah.
If you're making something like, if you're making Civilization, you kind of don't have the vertical slice until you have the whole game. Do you have any suggestions for that kind of game where you have a lot of very complex systems and the concept of vertical slice becomes quite difficult to...
So the question is, if you have a more complicated game or something like Civilization V where you kind of need, theoretically, it all there to be considered done, how can you navigate vertical slice, right?
Yeah. Is there a replacement, I suppose, for the concept of vertical slice in that context?
I would just look at what you're trying to achieve by having a vertical slice. So it doesn't, it's up to you and how you run your project and whether you feel like that's valuable. But I'd look at, okay, this is our last effective milestone of pre-production. Maybe we can't design, a lot of levels, but we can have a certain amount or a certain slice of that gameplay loop and the long-term progression that is enough for us to feel confident in doing all of it. So say it was a game with, I don't know, I can't think of anything right now, but let's say there's a game based on having a lot of levels that you play through, and at the end of the game you want 50, or there'll be a lot. Maybe for your vertical slice, if you can demonstrate the art direction and style, long-term player progression, that's probably important, and how to play through, say, 10 levels. They might not be, they might be like indicative of final quality, but maybe you throw them out. I don't know, that's a decision you have to make. So it's just looking at what you need to solve to move forward.
Thank you. That wasn't meant as a criticism.
No, that's okay.
Slices.
No, vertical slices suck now. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Awesome. Hello.
Hello. A question, because you have covered very well the unknowns within the game.
Yeah.
But how, as assuming the leading producer on the project, do you account for the unknowns in the stakeholders?
Yeah.
Or less diplomatically, how do you account for the insanity and craziness of your stakeholders or your client?
Yeah.
And how do you factor that in?
Oh man, that's another talk in itself. So the question is, how do you account for unknowns within the context of stakeholders and clients or the other people that you're managing? It's a very good question. I briefly touched on it in the Cynefin framework, and I'm happy to talk more about it, but it depends on what it is that you're dealing with. So I think, let's say it's the people that you've sold the pitch to, you've got a clear idea. A lot of that might come down to managing expectations. Are you both aligned on the game that you're making, or are you now doing something completely different to what you signed off on? Getting their buy-in really early and building that trust from the beginning is important too, of course, with anyone, but especially in the beginning to show that you're making progress towards those goals and they're on your side with that too, and the vision that you're making. The rest of it, at a high level, comes down to the risks that occur on the project or the problems that come up and how you communicate or work with them on that. So if you now need to pivot the game, what will help them feel confident that you've got it under control to make that work? So again, it completely depends on the phase. I just want to slip back to this slide because I think it covers it well. Does anyone else have questions? Yeah, so for example, if we're in a space of chaos and we've just changed everything, saying that you've got some ideas of how to solve it will help. It's not going to solve everything. If you're early in the production, managing expectations is pre-production. Managing expectations is more important because they don't yet see the game in front of them. So how can you help them feel confident in that? And then theoretically, as you go through, it's about exciting and inspiring and keeping that going. Maybe you've got a big change and you get their approval. Depends on the context. Does that broadly answer your question?
Broadly, yes.
Broadly. Would you like to talk more about it later? Sounds good. Anyone else have questions? I think this person was first, if that's all right. Okay, you can go, apparently.
Oh, sure. I just thought, I might have some pearls of wisdom, because I assume that a project or a team could be in a state with all four of these, with different parts of the team
Yeah.
in a state of chaos, and some parts of the team loving it, they're clear.
Totally.
Do you have any words or stories to talk to that?
Ooh.
So the stories is pearls of wisdom?
Yeah, pearls of wisdom is probably a safer track. I think that goes down to team management. I think it's about looking at what you need to do to support the team as a whole. If you have a part of the team that is in more of a dire strait like chaos, or perhaps more negative people, we want to do what we can to support them because they're likely to be the most vocal and to have that energy roll off. We've got to go in 1 minute. So yeah, completely depends on the context, and I'd advise supporting it based on each group. And yeah, it's a hard one to answer because if you've got people that are less well off, you're going to need to get more involved and hands-on to figure out what that problem is and support them to getting there. Yeah. Quick answer. All right, thank you everyone.